Welcome all, Elsa. I'm Emily Cotham and I'm the Partnership Manager for London Communities Emergencies Partnership. Um, Before we start today's session, I just wanted, or all of us from the team just wanted to say that our thoughts are, of course, with everyone that has been impacted by yesterday's terror attack. Um, Obviously, the rise in hate crime recently, and including anti-Semitic and Islamophobic attacks, is really concerning. And it also highlights the importance of all of our work around community resilience and a need for a more cohesive approach to strengthening community safety and social cohesion. So, yeah, we just wanted to say that. At LSEP, we do sit on the London Resilience Forum and we're linked in with London Resilience Unit and our Faith and Belief Sector colleagues. So if anyone wanted to pick up any conversations about this outside of this meeting, I'll put my email address in the chat, but do connect. And now we'll get into today's session. So please do introduce yourself in the chat. It's always great to see all the different variety of organisations that you've all come from. And just to let you know, we are recording today's presentation so that it can be uploaded onto the Communities Prepared YouTube channel. There will be a Q&A held at the end of the session, so you will have hopefully plenty of opportunity to ask questions. And you can also ask questions in the chat, and we can reply either in the chat or in person. And please do make sure you're on mute and turn off your camera if bandwidth isn't helping. So I've got a couple of minutes just to explain what LSEP is for those of you who haven't been to these sessions before. So we are London Communities Emergencies Partnership, and we exist to support charities and community groups across London to prepare for, coordinate during, and learn from major emergencies. And we do this through a variety of ways, but primarily it's about building relationships. So we always say in an emergency, we like to say, how are you, rather than who are you, and make friends before you need them. All of those phrases you've probably heard before, but it's really important that we build relationships, not just amongst us as a sector, but with multi-agencies, statutory response organisations as well. And the other thing is sharing knowledge and insight. Whether you're a tiny charity or local community organisation or a national emergency response charity, the more information that we have, the better we can support our communities. So this is just a bit of, we run various capability projects. We have quarterly meetings for partners. If you're not a partner, I will put a link in the chat, but it would be great to have you join us. And also it's super open. So if you don't have time to attend all of our meetings, that is not a requirement. You might just want to join the WhatsApp group and get the information. We want to make it work for any type of charity and community group that exists and want to be part of this. So just to quickly explain, we're a network of networks. So we're jointly run by two charities. One is London Plus, and they primarily support charities and community groups through networks such as the Volunteer Centre Network or the Council for Voluntary Service Network. And so they're not emergency response, but they have a really good knowledge of voluntary community sector in London. And then the other charity that we're co-chaired by is the VCS Emergencies Partnership. And they are more, although they're very widely connected with lots of charities, they primarily started with emergency response charities such as the British Red Cross, Salvation Army, REACT, and those types of charities. And so they have really good knowledge from across England of emergency response and community resilience. We came together during COVID, and then we've been officially an LSEP for the last 3 years. We also work really closely with our colleagues at Communities Prepared, but also with London Boroughs Faith Network, Protection Approaches, who's our equalities organisation, and London Resilience. So we really are a network of networks, and that's how we're a small team of two, and that's how we reach as wide as we can across London. That was a brief overview because I realised the time, but I will put my email address in the chat, and it would be great to catch up with any of you who don't know LSEP and would like to find out more. I will hand over to Violaine.
Thank you, Emily. So I'm Violaine and I work for Groundwork South for the program called Communities Prepared. So we are a delivery partner of the London Resilience Committee Program, which is funded by the London Resilience Unit. So the overall goal of this program, with which we are actually today organizing the fourth session in our webinars, is to be able to help the London's diverse communities to be more resilient in the face of emergency. And we are doing that in this program through the development of community emergency plans, but also the establishment of community resilience hubs. So there's loads of different components to that program. And there are a lot of resources that you can find as part of the community resilience London Resilience Committee program, sorry. So if we can have the next slide, Emily, please. So there is those free webinars. So you will see it in the slide. Yeah, we've got them running all the way up to August 2026. And today is the fourth session, the April session. We also have some online resources. You can sign up for the program if you want to really have up-to-date information about what's going on with this program. It is getting to the end of the program, but there is still a lot of things going on. As you can see, the webinars are still going on as well. So you can sign up for free. I'll put the link in the chat if you are not already signed up for it. And if we can have just quickly, I'll give an overview of the webinar series. So if you can click to the next slide, Emily, please. So you can see we are in April, and we have this month a really exciting session because we are learning from what is happening in resilience over the other side of our own UK context. So we'll hear today from our guest speaker, Kate Mingoya Fortune. So I'll introduce Kate in a minute. Another very important resource that is really shaping all of that program is the London Community Resilience Toolkit. If Emily click to the next slide, that's great. And I'll put a link also on the chat for where you can download a free copy of the London Community Resilience Toolkit. It is a really important resource that helped us in the way we engage with the communities around London on how they can build their own resilience to these emergencies. So that was a really quick overview of what the program is and what these webinars exist for. So if we can have the next slide now, Emily, please. Thank you. Today's webinar is going to be about international practice. So we're going to hear from what happened around the world in resilience throughout our webinars. And today we're going to hear a bit more about what happened in the USA. So we've got today, so we can have our next slide, please, Emily. I'm really pleased to introduce Kate Mingoya Fortune. She serves as Groundwork USA's Chief Officer of Climate Resilience and Land Use. And Kate is a people-centered climate adaptation planner, community organizer, an educator, a parent, and an optimist as well. Raised in an environmental justice neighborhood, she is committed to furthering a future where all people live in clean, thriving communities. She received a BA in biology from Reed College, a Master of Science Education from CUNY Liman, sorry for my pronunciation, not always good, and a Master of City Planning from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And she also is an author. She's recently released a book called Climate Action for Busy People. So I really highly recommend to have a look at that if you have the chance. But today she's going to be telling us all about what happened back in the US on resilience for communities. So thank you very much for joining us, Kate, and over to you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Hopefully that shows up for you folks. Good afternoon. My name's Kate. I'm the Chief Officer of Climate Resilience and Land Use at Groundwork USA. I live in Boston, Massachusetts, on the East Coast of the United States. Groundwork USA is a national network of 21 people-centered environmental justice organizations. We stole the model from Groundwork UK, almost 30 years ago, and have expanded to three main priority areas. Our role is to put residents in the driver's seat in making changes to their built and social environments so they can live in the clean, green, healthy spaces that residents already have visions for. And we do that in three ways. One is by taking over contaminated parcels of land known as brownfields and turning them into mostly non-revenue generating community assets. So think like parks, trails, urban farms, that sort of stuff. The second piece of what we do is build community ability to advocate for a better distribution of resources into their community. So that might look like education, community organizing, teaching folks how their government works so that they can get a more equitable distribution of resources to keep their communities safer from the climate crisis and to bring those visions to life. And then finally, we do workforce development and job training. And we do that with younger people, so folks ages 13 to about 32 to 35, everything from how do you install solar panels, to collecting community science data and putting it into maps and speaking to officials, to becoming arborists that can care for our tree canopy cover. And in our work, resident empowerment is first and foremost. We very much disagree with the idea that we have any of the answers. Community members have the answers, and our job is to bring resources to them and help to empower them. And what does that look like? To be successful in empowering residents, we think of this as a three-pronged strategy. One, making sure that residents understand why do your communities look the way that they do. Why are some neighborhoods hotter than others? Why do some neighborhoods flood more than others? Why is the air quality better over here and not so good over there? Spoiler, it doesn't happen by accident. There's a reason. And if we can understand those reasons that got us to where we are, that helps us to understand that things are changeable. Two, we want to make sure that residents are well resourced. That includes bringing them things like data and tools and processes and additional expertise, but it also means respecting them for their time. So we pay residents what we would call a living wage, about $15 to $20 US per hour, for bringing their expertise about their neighborhoods to the table into these community planning conversations, because no one knows their neighborhood better than the people who live there. And then finally, intersectionality is very important to us, especially making sure that our work is done intergenerationally. So we like to think of K to gray. The youngest and the elders in our communities do have to come together if we're going to have wise, stable changes to our community. So it's already getting really hot. I don't know what it's like over in the UK, but we have already started to have excessive heat warnings throughout the United States. Summer, it's only April, but summer is off to a start. So I'm expecting to see a lot of these types of notifications on my phone. And one of the things that's very disturbing is that this is likely to be one of the coolest summers for the foreseeable future. It keeps getting hotter. It's going to continue to get hotter. But often when we talk about the climate crisis, it's usually through a global lens, where we talk about things like receding ice sheets or polar bears drowning as they swim miles between ice floes, or collapsing snow crab populations because there's nowhere for the adults to lay their eggs. But if you live in an urban environment the way that I do, this is probably more representative of how you experience the climate crisis. Things like nuisance flooding, which can bring a couple inches of water into your basement, ruining this clothes that you stored down there or destroying HVAC equipment. We've had a number of heat domes in places that have not had that before. The upper left-hand picture is of the public transportation system in Portland, Oregon. It's called the MAX. And there was a heat dome a few years ago that was so severe, it literally melted the public transportation infrastructure. And then air quality has become more of a concern in cities that did not used to have to deal with it. A couple of years ago, the entire East Coast of the United States was covered in this thick blanket of orange and pink smoke that had blown over from wildfires in the West Coast and had settled on top of us for about a week. And if you get a case of what I like to call the climate bubble guts, where you feel nervous or anxious, you're not really sure what the future is going to look like for you, or maybe you're the younger ones and other generations in your life, I just want to affirm and confirm that you're paying the right amount of attention. This sort of stuff is disturbing. It is difficult. It is nauseating. And especially over the last couple of decades, we have not been given great resources and great ideas about how to make change at the local level. While you absolutely should be doing things like recycling and line drying your laundry and reducing your carbon footprint, it can feel pretty divorced from a giant cloud of pink and orange smoke settling over your neighborhood, or your neighborhood flooding severely. I like to start a lot of my presentations with this picture. This is of the Lower Price Hill neighborhood in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's in the Midwestern United States along the Ohio River. And I want to ask, if you were hanging out here on a hot summer day, where in this picture would you want to hang out? If you're anything like me, you probably want to be on the left-hand side of this dotted line. Here, there is a robust and lush tree canopy cover that's going to shade you from the sun. If it rains, there's the roots of these mature trees to soak up rainwater. And there's little patches of grass and even a swimming pool to catch some of that water. Whereas on the right-hand side of this dotted line, which I cannot emphasize enough to you is on the same block, the picture looks a lot different. There's not much of a tree canopy cover. The trees are dead and desiccated, or they're really stunted and shrubby. So there's not going to be much shade that's cast. There's also a tremendous amount of asphalt and dark roofs. This dark material is going to absorb the sun's solar radiation and then let it out again throughout the day and night, making the right-hand side a lot hotter than the left-hand side. And if it rains, there's nowhere for water to go. So the right-hand side of this image, which again is on the same block, is a lot more likely to flood than the left-hand side. Now, NASA has sent a ton of satellites up into space, which capture data on things like land surface temperature and tree canopy cover. There's a lot more data that we can get from sensors here on Earth. But if you were to zoom up to one of these satellites, Landsat 8 or Landsat 9, and look at tree canopy cover in Cincinnati, Ohio, what you saw in that image is reflected citywide. So the picture, where the picture was taken, is represented by that red star. And we see on the left-hand side, the tree canopy cover a lot denser than the right-hand side. And that has a huge impact on the way that people experience heat. This is ambient air temperature in August at about 7 a.m. Again, where the photo's taken is where that red star is. And you can see that the left-hand side of the city, which has a lot more tree canopy cover, is significantly cooler, blue is cooler in this image, than the right-hand side of the city. So we have an affiliate in one of the affiliates in our Groundwork network in Cincinnati, but we also have one in New Orleans. And I also think this is an important story in understanding why do some of our places look the way that they do. If you've ever gotten a chance to go to New Orleans, and I highly, highly recommend it, you may hear of this former park called the Claiborne Park. And it was a linear park that ran through an upper class Black neighborhood. Lots of wealthy business owners, lots of people that would go to see and be seen as they walked along this linear park, shaded by the limbs of these 100-year oaks that would be dripping with Spanish moss. Two things to know about New Orleans is there's a lot of hurricanes, so it gets very wet there, and it's really, really hot most of the year. So this is very important infrastructure for that community. But like a lot of cities in the United States, the federal government came with its calling card of urban renewal and said, hey, New Orleans, if you want to be connected to our federal highway system, you need to let us, the federal government, place where the highway is going to be. So, of course, because this was a Black neighborhood, this beautiful linear park that brought a lot of culture and important climate resilience to this neighborhood was razed along with a number of the homes and businesses to make way for the raised Claiborne Avenue Expressway. So this is a before and after. On the left-hand side, what the park looked like in 1942, and on the right-hand side, what it looked like in 2016. As you can imagine, without that grass, without those trees, that neighborhood is not only a lot hotter, not only has a lot worse air quality from the smog coming off of the raised expressway, but also floods a lot. This is about a block away from the Claiborne Avenue Expressway. So at this point, you're like, what's going on? It is the afternoon. They had said, this woman's book says she's a hopeful optimist. Her bio says she's an optimist. What is going on here? It's okay. This is where we turn the corner and we're going to talk about, hey, all of this stuff happened. What do we actually do about it? So at Groundwork USA, for the last 8 years, I run this program called the Climate Safe Neighborhoods Partnership. It pulls together about 14 cities in our Groundwork network across the country to engage in a three-pronged strategy with the community. The first is we work with residents to understand, why do our communities look the way that they do? We know it's not an accident. Things like the Claiborne Avenue Expressway, a history of redlining, which I can talk more about later, if you're not familiar with it, and decisions at the federal and municipal level have made it so that some neighborhoods are experiencing the climate crisis in worse and more difficult and challenging ways than others. The second piece that we work on with residents is to have them prioritize the changes that they would like to see in their community. And we'd like to take a data-informed as compared to a data-driven way of prioritizing those changes. We want residents to know what the options are, how much they cost, but ultimately any suggested changes in their neighborhoods need to be culturally complementary to what residents themselves think that they need in their neighborhoods. And then finally, we build resident capacity to intervene in local systems to advocate for a more equitable distribution of resources. And for a lot of residents, that's figuring out like, how are decisions made in our community? Why do we have a mayor and a city councilor? Who gets to decide on the budget? Where did this master plan for the city come from, and how do we make sure that it represents us? Because the communities that we work in, which are usually lower income communities, communities that are experiencing the worst impacts of the climate crisis, communities that live on or around contaminated land, because there's a history of industry there, are often left out of decision-making opportunities at the municipal level. And so we pull together intergenerational resident advisory councils. The youngest members I've seen have been 6. The oldest members that I've seen have been 96, to come together to engage in that 3-pronged process over a period of 3 to 6 years. And it's important for us to understand the needs and the desire of the community, to help them understand what the landscape is that they're going to be intervening in, and give them an opportunity to engage in shared leadership and decision making. Each one of the residents that joins our councils, which are usually about 30-ish members, also has a responsibility to go out into the community and bring these ideas, this information, to where people are. So it might be someone who's very well respected on their block that goes and talks to their neighbors about, hey, are you experiencing flooding in your basement? Gosh, it's really hot. How has your electric bill been lately? Mine's been really high. Oh, yours too? And then pulls these other residents into community workshops and charrettes that we hold to make sure that this knowledge is distributed as far and as wide as we can. And just to be clear about what I mean by systems intervention, it's where are there decisions being made? Where are there resources available in the city? And where is there an opportunity for residents to engage in that process? So again, like the master planning process, in American cities, every 5 to 15 years or so, municipalities will make a plan for the city and figure out how they fund changes to the city. That's a great opportunity for systems intervention. Annual budgeting processes, also a great way to do that. Any sort of greening plans, which are becoming more and more common, also a good place for residents to get involved. And we're interested in intervention at a number of scales, making sure that there's changes to public land and public space. So maybe we need a new park somewhere, or a microforest, or even just better drainage along the streetscape, and maybe some shading trees. Private space is also something that's really important. Maybe there's not a lot of room to make changes in the public sphere, but what does it look like if the city maybe starts a program to paint people's roofs white so that they can reduce their utilities costs? And then, of course, there's the bigger policy documents as well, which map out the plans for the city. And one of the ways that we also engage residents, in addition to that 3-pronged strategy, is engaging in community science data collection. And I know that some folks say like, I'm not really a science person. I'm not really a math person. I think everyone kind of is. If you've ever walked down one side of the street as compared to another because it was too hot on the other side of the street, you've engaged in community science because you have some information about how your built environment is different. So we engage residents in everything from really simple mapping exercises, figuring out how many trees are there on a block, to having them map areas that flood, to using more sophisticated but very inexpensive tools to do things like air quality and land surface temperature and ambient air temperature modeling. And we find this data to be so important because in theory, ideally, in a perfect world, decision makers would listen to residents when they come to them and say, my basement is flooding. My kid's route to school is really hot. But decision makers use data. They speak and use the language of data because they want to know if they intervene, how is the world different because of that intervention? So we work with residents so that they're able to collect, present, and you can see a picture of some residents collecting some data that they've collected on the lower left-hand image, and can interpret and pair that data that they've collected with their lived experience. And that makes it so much more powerful when working with decision makers. This is some of the work that we've done with our youth. Again, we talked about the job training programs. These are some of the folks that are ages 14 to 18 that were using FLIR cameras and ambient air temperature monitors to understand the cooling effect of trees, and found that, hey, trees cool the neighborhood a lot more powerfully than bus stop shelters or just kind of nothing in open plazas. And so anybody could, you kind of would know that instinctively, but in order to bring that data to the table and say, hey, it's 115 degrees on the street in front of the library, but a block away where there's trees, it's cooled pretty significantly. That's something that's very powerful. And that since it's measurable, it's something that decision makers can act towards. We also do bigger scale GIS and data collection processes with our residents. This is of the Hudson Valley area, Yonkers, New York, which is about 40 minutes by train north of New York City. The leftmost image shows ambient air temperature. So we can see that it's pretty hot along the river, which is a little counterintuitive. We also looked at where are parking lots located. And if you look in the third image, where we've overlaid parking lots with the ambient air temperature, the area where there's a lot of parking lots, it's pretty hot. And so it makes a lot of sense. And so that helped residents to identify, we've always known that it's really hot, but what's one of the culprits that's making it so hot? So residents were in the Yonkers action plan looking at recommending shade structures, more trees being planted, and the removal of some of this pavement for better, more cooling options to help cool down that portion of the city. In addition to the community science data collection, we also do a lot of demonstration projects. These are like really, really inexpensive things that residents can do if they've just got, an hour or two together on Saturday. Things like attaching a rain barrel to your downspout to collect stormwater and keep it out of your basement, to doing some tree planting, to supporting one another in sprucing up their community gardens. And we do these demonstration projects for a couple of reasons. One, it's to show that change is possible. In a lot of the neighborhoods that we have worked in, residents have been told no for many years. They've been ignored for many years. But when they engage in these demonstration projects, it shows that change is possible, it's tangible, and it doesn't have to just rest with the government. It's something that residents can do independently. They can do it collectively with one another. They can do it in conjunction with nonprofits. If there's a yard, if there's some sort of a space, you can install green infrastructure. You can make changes that are meaningful to your community. One of the examples of a demonstration project that we got to work on is in Groundwork Elizabeth, which is in Elizabeth, New Jersey. It's about an hour south of New York City. And microforests, if you're not familiar with them, they're super dense plantings of trees, shrubs, and ground cover. And the idea is that you can use a space as small as a single parking spot and get the same benefits of a 30-year-old forest of the same size in about 5 years. And those benefits are things like stormwater retention and higher water quality for any of the runoff that does happen, heat reduction, and air quality improvements. We were able to deploy some drones to take a look at the temperature between the microforest, which is a small parcel of land behind the local library, versus what used to be there, which was a really big parking lot. And we found that the parking lot was on average about 51.8 degrees Celsius. So that is pretty hot to the touch. But in the microforest, after only 3 years, that area was about 28 degrees Celsius on one of the hot summer days. So you can see a pretty big community cooling effect, a respite for wildlife and for people. There's a couple benches in that forest. So you can just kind of sit and relax and cool down in the urban environment. But green infrastructure often takes a long time to be useful. Trees are tiny when they're first planted. I think they're kind of ugly when they're first planted. They're like baby birds. They've not quite realized their potential yet. So it takes a while. What are other things that we can do? Other types of projects that we have done in order to measure the impact and effect of really small solutions. Oh, sorry, I should mention, these are super, super cheap. It's like 18,000 US to install. That includes the pavement removal, getting the trees, planting the trees, especially if you have volunteer labor, and maintaining them for the first 5 years. So very inexpensive compared to other really big methods of cooling. This also really cheap. This is back in Yonkers, which again is north of New York City. And we were looking at what it would take to reduce people's utility bills. I assume you guys are going through the same thing that we're going through in the United States, where energy costs are and have been through the roof. So for a family that's on a fixed income, that's a low income family, reducing your electricity usage for cooling in the summertime is a big priority. So we explored what it would take to have residents and our green team and our ground core members paint roofs white on apartment buildings. And we were able to find a temperature difference of about 63 degrees centigrade between the roofs that were painted white versus the roofs that were left as blacktop. On average, the annual savings that residents have been experiencing in their units, we got them to give us their electricity bills, is when you adjust it for the varying temperatures throughout multiple summers, is on average about $120 per year, or £89 was the translation I looked up yesterday. So that's a pretty big savings if you're a family that's on a fixed income. To cut that out by doing literally nothing, that's a big deal and it's across the entire apartment building. So people who are a little bit higher up in the apartment building saw bigger savings. People lower down saw some smaller savings. And that's also a really big temperature difference in the neighborhood. I looked it up, and that temperature difference is about what it takes to brew a nice cup of oolong tea. So it gets pretty hot up there. So that's what it looks like at the demonstration project level. That's what our work has looked like at the data collection level. What does it look like at the policy level? I'm going to give you a couple examples of wins and a couple examples of projects that folks are working on. So that picture that I showed you of Cincinnati, the one where I compared the tree canopy cover to the temperature, we've been working for about 4 years now in Cincinnati on a resident-led visualization of priorities. So where do residents want green space? Where do they want community elements, places for them to build networks? Because a really big part of building resilience is not just keeping the heat and flooding and air quality at bay, it's also forming really strong relationships with your neighbors, because the time to get to know the people in your community is not when the streets are flooded, it's now. So we see this work as both resilience building from an infrastructure and a policy perspective, but also from a person-to-person perspective. So residents have been able to lay out where do they want trees, where do they want opportunities to gather, and residents were successful in getting their priorities put into the Green Cincinnati Plan. Originally, the Green Cincinnati Plan was completely unfunded. This is very common in the United States. You see a green plan, you see a resilience plan, there's $0 to make it happen, and it's just kind of well wishes. Residents were able to advocate to their city councilors, to their mayor, to the government offices, and were able to get $700 in earmarks just for the community imaged in this map that residents created of their priorities. And they're continuing to work with the city to get these projects in, show proof of concept in order to get additional funding from the city. So this is not like a 4 years and you're done. Any changes to the built environment, any changes to policy, they take a long time. In Groundwork, Rhode Island, the cities of Pawtucket and Central Falls, which are just north of Providence, Rhode Island is an East Coast state in the United States, the municipalities would do a first come, first serve distribution for trees. So they would put on their website every spring, hey, fill out this English only application if you want a tree in your community. And then the trees would be gone like that. And they would usually go to wealthier, English-speaking neighborhoods first, people who had internet access, people who already knew about the program, people who spoke English and could fill out the English-only application. So we pulled together a group of residents who advocated to the city for a more equitable distribution. So instead of using a first-come, first-serve model, these cities now use a tree equity model, where they look at maps, both ones that we've generated from Landsat data and one that residents, mostly youth, have generated from their walk to school, using air temperature monitors, or have calculated by counting and looking at the health of trees to identify areas where trees are needed most. And the city is now using a tree equity distribution model. In Yonkers, there was a 30 resident advisory board that worked with other members of their community, focusing on the most vulnerable neighborhoods for heat and flooding, two huge issues in Yonkers, doing a tremendous amount of community science and demonstration projects, and we're able to contribute a number of neighborhoods for prioritization in the Yonkers Climate Action Plan. This is funded, and if you go to Yonkers today, this was probably about 6 years ago that they were able to get the action plan modified to include a prioritization on vulnerable neighborhoods. The neighborhood looks really different. There's a lot more trees, there's parks and depaving projects that are underway thanks to the advocacy of residents. And then second to last is, I love this example. So this is in San Diego, which is on the West Coast. And San Diego also had one of those calling cards of urban renewal moments where a big creek that runs through the entirety of the city was channelized. That means that engineers put concrete to help direct the flow of the creek. This is problematic for a number of reasons. We're only kind of now realizing this in the last 10, 15 years, depending on who you ask. But it contributes pretty significantly to flash flooding. People dump stuff into the channelized creek. There's not much in the way of trees or vegetation to soak onto water during heavy rain events. So the creek would often overflow. So one day you would have patio furniture if you lived near the creek on your backyard. The next day, whoosh, a flash flood would come and take it away. People's cars would get flipped over, sewage would bubble up into people's yards. And residents had been trying for decades to get the city to do something about it, to dechannelize that creek. But the city said, hey, this actually doesn't count as infrastructure for us. It's actually state infrastructure. There's nothing we can do about it. We're not eligible for their funds. And so residents were able to come together to get the mayor to change regulations and change the way that the creek was designated to now identify it as a type of infrastructure that it belongs to the city, opening up eligibility for state funding. And they've begun the process of dechannelizing the creek. This will be a multi-decade effort because, again, it runs through most of the city. But Groundwork San Diego is able to do this through resident empowerment training, teaching folks how does local government work? Where do we push and pull the levers of power? Where are their financial resources? How do we access them? So working with residents, they were able to build their capacity to then participate in the Chollas Creek Blue-Green Collaborative, which is a collaborative of residents, municipal officials, landowners, government officials to build a plan for how the entire Chollas Creek watershed is going to become more resilient to prevent flash flooding, to prevent property destruction, and to make sure that residents in the most vulnerable neighborhoods have a seat at the table in deciding where stormwater parks are placed or what types of infrastructure are invested in. Finally, the last thing that I'll talk about is we've decided to take a regional approach in Massachusetts, which is where I live. We have 3 affiliates, Groundwork Lawrence, Groundwork South Coast, which is in the south coast of the state, and Groundwork Somerville. Somerville is actually where I live. I can see Boston from the end of my block. We're very close. And they are leading a Cool Spaces for Healthy Places campaign that's focused primarily on heat. We have very little green space in Massachusetts and pretty severe heat islands owing to our industrial past. I live just a few blocks away from a former lead smelting plant. If you go a few blocks in that direction, there is a former brick manufacturing plant. So we don't have a lot of green space, but we have a ton of heat struggles. So residents, again, ranging from as young as 6 to as old as 96, in this case, have been working together to collect community science data collection, pair it with lived experience and their verbal and experienced history of the community to get the city to understand the impacts of extreme heat and then to focus on intervening in each one of these 3 cities in master planning processes and budgetary cycles with their city councilor to try and get the city to focus more energy and attention on cooling our streets. So those are examples of the policy stuff. I wanted to leave you with a few kind of like uplifting examples of what change looks like when these processes are successful. Because once you get the policy win, that doesn't necessarily mean that the people in charge are going to do the thing, right? Priorities change, administrations change. So we can't leave everything in the hands of the government. It's important to have a relationship between government, residents, and nonprofits together to get work to happen. So do you remember that like really sad story I told you about 10 minutes ago regarding the Claiborne Avenue Expressway? This is about 5-ish years ago. You can see still kind of gross, a lot of smog, very loud. This is what it looks like now. If you go to New Orleans and you go to the Claiborne Avenue Expressway area, Groundwork New Orleans was able to build in conjunction with other nonprofits, with residents, with the municipality, this beautiful stormwater park that holds over 80,000 gallons of stormwater per rain event. This neighborhood, this area used to flood so high that if there was a rainstorm, you'd be walking thigh deep in water. People's cars got ruined, their homes constantly were flooded and then filled with mold. Now that kind of flooding is not happening anymore. There are shade structures that are not pictured in this, but you can sit underneath the shade structures and they've got fans. It was very, very hot in New Orleans, but they've also got outlets where you can charge your phones from those solar benches. And you remember the expressway? You can like barely see it. They're able to bring in, using cranes, mature trees to get instant shade, instant particulate matter capture from the branches and leaves on those trees, and instant stormwater retention capacity, not just from the bioswale, but also from the roots of those mature trees. And there's a pretty big social impact. One, just kids going to the neighborhood and saying, gosh, I have a place to play. I have some place that looks beautiful. I have some place that I can cool down on my walk to work. But they're pretty big, to the tune of millions of dollars of stormwater retention benefits, mostly from the bioswale, but also from the trees that we've installed. And in general, whenever we do projects, either independently, with a nonprofit, with the foundation, with the government, we make sure to do a benefit cost analysis because, again, decision makers use that language of data and of numbers to make decisions about things. So for projects, I think that the average of this is for groundwork project, it's around $7 for every dollar spent. We get $7 of benefit for every dollar that we spend on average across all of our different types of projects. Why else do we look at this? We want to make sure we're prioritizing what works. There's not a lot of money to spend out there on climate stuff. Here in the United States, it's actually one of the least resourced areas for charities. We fall below cats, which is fine. I have a cat. I like cats, but I would also like people not to drown in their homes or die of heat stroke. And so we want to make sure we're making a compelling argument about what works and we're not doing what does not work and doesn't have a good return on investment. We also collect this information to build resident capacity. It's very powerful for a member of the community to come and say, you know, we collected data on this project that we did independently or that the city did. Here's what it means, and here's what we would like to see in the future. So it gives residents a higher degree of power if they're walking into spaces on a level playing field with decision makers. And that's about it. I'll stop there. There's lots more to say. My email is up there if you have additional questions. As was mentioned earlier, a lot of this is also captured in a book I wrote recently, Climate Action for Busy People, which is to help folks figure out how do you make change if you don't have a lot of time? And how do you make change if you don't have a lot of resources? But you can check out the work on our website as well to learn more about all the things that we do at Groundwork USA. So thanks so much for being here. It was great to get to tell you about our work.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kate. That was really interesting. And I was definitely scribbling down lots of your really great projects that you were talking about. We've got a little bit of time for questions, which is fantastic. So there hasn't been any in the chat, but if anybody does have questions, please do put your hand up. This is a great opportunity to be able to learn from outside of London and the UK. While people are, I'm going to take chair's privilege while people are thinking about their questions, because I had a couple myself. I was really interested because it's something that we think about quite a lot, and it is around the intergenerational resident advisory councils you were talking about, and like how they work. A little bit more detail would be really great on how they work to influence decision making. And also, obviously, that might fit. Well, they probably fit lots of demographics, but that's very age based. So, how do you connect with other demographic groups and ensure your programs are reaching out to the most vulnerable?
Thanks for that. So the communities that Groundwork USA works in are usually neighborhoods that are the second, or communities that are the second or third largest city in their state. They are communities that have a history of boom and bust cycle owing to industry, and usually have a pretty high degree of economic depression in them. So the majority places that we work with are majority minority. And majority low to moderate income. And that represents about 80 to 90% of the folks that we work in. And those are the folks that are often left out of planning processes. And so we find that this K to Gray approach is really helpful in capturing folks across demographies, because people are forced to go to school together. So you can get anyone from who's in school, they bring this information home to their families, to their classmates. And that's a really great recruiting model. Also, it's important to talk with older residents because they're often left out of resilience conversations and conversations about their safety. I know nothing of Celsius, so someone calculate this, but here, one of the pieces of data that we use is when we think about extreme heat, people think about those really severe and boiling days. But for someone who's elderly, even 75 degrees can have adverse health impacts on things like blood pressure and their diabetes and any conditions. So it's really important that we are pulling folks together for all of the different needs so that people can age in their communities safely. What's safe for folks at both ends of the spectrum usually ends up being safe for everybody in the middle. It's like making a curb cut in the sidewalk. Yeah, it's good for someone in a wheelchair. Also really good for a parent who's pushing a stroller along with them. So in our community outreach, we meet people where they are, and we do a lot of door knocking. We show up at community events and festivals. We meet people in the places where they're most likely to experience heat and flooding, and talk to them about it by meeting them where they are, because we can't expect to just put out some flyers and expect to get good representation, we need to have conversations with folks. And this is a very slow process. And we also use a concentric circle model of organizing, where when we find folks that are interested, we ask them to bring a friend. And then we ask those friends to bring a friend. We ask those friends to bring a friend. And then that gives us a better cross section. The other thing I'll mention is we tend to focus on very specific neighborhoods. So we'll use maps and GIS and data to identify where are the neighborhoods that are most vulnerable, and we start there. So a citywide effort in a place like Yonkers, which has a lot of hundreds of thousands of people, that's not going to work. We want to focus on the most vulnerable neighborhoods from a demographic perspective and from a climate perspective. So it's a little bit about how we structure our work.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I can see
I'll jump in for a question, if that's all right.
Yes, do.
Thank you. The reason I didn't put my hand up is because me and VLN are logged in on the same account, and weirdly the hands up function disappears if you do that. The thing that stands out to me, Kate, is how you get through to government and how you work with government who may not want to admit some of the past wrongs that they've done. So there's a little bit of this work that's a bit political, right? And I can imagine trying to implement some of this stuff in London or other parts of the UK, that being one of the hardest bits to get over, because absolutely 100% in the UK, we have housing estates that are like shockingly badly designed, and like, you know, the level of like quality housing is very low. And, you know, they're therefore very vulnerable to extreme weather events, include especially heat. But how do you do that little bit of breaking through to like getting them on board if they're a bit like not wanting to admit the wrongs of the past, I suppose? Be well interested to hear about that.
Yeah. And in the United States, we don't have a great culture of having those type of difficult conversations, especially if they revolve around race or class, which are two very touchy subjects that we don't have a good a strategy for having dialogue either at the national or at the local level. And when we first started this project, we ran into it all the time because municipalities would not want to admit that there was a difference between the way wealthier people and poorer people were experiencing, or Black people and white people. And so that was one of the reasons why we relied on data, because data can be a neutral platform for conversations about equity. Instead of saying like us versus them, this party versus that party, your administration versus another administration, we'd say, hey, it is 27 degrees hotter on this part of town than the other part of town. Our neighbors live there and we love them. We are those neighbors. We are that constituency. Can you explain to us how we can work with you to make this a little bit fairer? And so I think some people would say it's like a little bit controversial because you are removing part of the root of the issue in those conversations with elected officials, with government officials, but to a certain extent, like getting the change is really what matters. And if residents are all on the same page about why it is, the first door that we can open up is, hey, there's a difference here, government official. Can you help us understand what we can do to reduce the space in between that difference, and start the conversation there? In Elizabeth, New Jersey, the mayor at the time was very hesitant to engage on these topics because racial justice is kind of a touchy issue. And he was very skeptical to talk about things like a history of redlining or some of those differences. But after being shown the maps, after going on field trips with residents, he himself penned a change to the master planning process, acknowledging the history of racial discrepancy, and pledging a really substantial sum of money for urban forestry across Elizabeth, New Jersey. So you can get through to, and this person had been in office for like 38 years. So like they weren't new on the block. You can get to that change if you start from that data as a neutral platform for conversations about change.
Thank you. That's awesome. That kind of delves into one of the comments we had in the chat from Sean, who was saying, like, there's a lot of flat roofs in London, especially in social housing. So like, and was wondering about, he had put a question in, does anyone know about the policies in London? But I guess the fact that you've brought this data here today, it might be a different country, but it gives us a little bit of leverage then to go to policymakers and be like, hey, look, like, instead of just saying, no, like this has been done somewhere else. So Sean, if you're still on the call, maybe pull some data from Groundwork USA's website and use that as your kind of platform to go speak to your local decision maker.
And it's so cheap.
Things like that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the other thing is it's so expensive. You're talking about, $120 of annual savings per resident in a building per unit in a building that has about 12 units in it. But that 1 year of one savings for one apartment is the cost of painting the white roof. So it's about a little under $200 to do the entirety of the roof, to do it 2 coats with the right sealant. But you end up seeing that return on investment in a year. So these kind of really inexpensive projects, they're quick, they show great results, and the data speaks for itself in a way that's very powerful.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any more questions? Lots of food for thought. I was also quite interested about the Cool Spaces for Healthy Places project you were talking about. Is interesting because we have a Cool Spaces project in London, but it's all about like actual places, so like community centres and places that people can go when it's hot weather. But it sounds like yours is more about on the street and in public. Is that right?
It does, but it has the intention of, especially here in Somerville, of trying to turn some of because we don't have a ton of public land and there's not as many community centers here, but we do have things like public libraries. And one of the things that the residents who are engaged in this work are looking at is how do we take the public resources we do have available and make sure that they serve as these like community centers that can be cooling centers when it's very hot, that can meet people's needs if they reach out about health concerns. And so that's a big piece of what the residents are doing in their data collection, is finding these places that are already public resources and then doing research and collecting data around them to understand like who is most impacted, who would be in that catchment area, and then are trying to make recommendations to the municipality about how to cool the routes to these places so it's safe for people to get there. And then also how to make sure that these places serve as multi-purpose entities. So yes, it's already a library, but is it also a place where you can get out of the heat, and we make sure that there's a good independence for the power grid. Power grid failures are a really big problem in the United States because we can't keep up with how hot it's getting. So everyone turns on their AC, and then now no one has AC. So is there a way for these spaces to also have grid independence so that they're safe, but they're not running big, noisy, gassy oil generators if there's a power outage? So these are some of the things that residents are thinking about and advocating for.
Thank you. It's always interesting to hear of similar projects that happen elsewhere. We're on the right track, at least. Asia.
Thank you. And I was just going to mention on the back of what Kate just said, what about solar panel? Is that an option or not? Because in Harrow, the local authorities started using solar panel on social housing. So we've seen lots of properties with solar panels being put up. I think they've started with the elderly and more vulnerable, but it'd be really good to hear your point on that. That would be really helpful.
Yeah, those would be wonderful because they kind of pet 2 cats with one hand. They help with energy independence, but they also can help with cooling because the roof is not heating up as much, and that sunlight is either being absorbed as solar radiation in the cells or is being reflected back out through the coverage of it. So those would be great. In the neighborhoods that we work in, it tends to be financially out of reach for us. So I used to work as the Director of Policy and Program Development for our public housing, which I think is very similar to council housing in the UK. And there's a $40 billion with a B dollar deficit in very basic capital maintenance. So these are things like making sure there's functioning toilets, making sure that there's not lead paint where their children are, making sure that the floors are steady and stable, the roof is not going to collapse. And so often things like roofs will need upgrades before they can support the weight of the solar panels. But a lot of these lower income properties are just kind of hanging on for dear life to not have the roof leak or collapse. So major modifications are weight bearing things like green roofs, which is another thing that residents are interested in, but we often can't convince people to do because they're too expensive. And solar panels can be kind of difficult to do. So I think that's something that's aspirational. I think that's something right now, realistically, where I am rests with middle income to higher income communities. And in the lower income communities, we are just battling with pretty rapidly deteriorating housing infrastructure that can't support the weight of that. But residents do recommend it for municipal parking lots. And that's something that we've seen a change for, right? So you can keep that solar radiation from entering the asphalt and then radiating back out, contributing to the urban heat island effect. People's cars stay cooler, which everybody likes. No one likes getting into a hot car, and the city can generate some degree of electricity. So freestanding solar, we've had more progress on than solar that needs a building with like decent structural integrity to hold on to. And that's not true of all of the, lower income housing. It's not true of all of the public housing authorities, but it is a problem that we've run into pretty frequently across the states.
Thank you so much. We've got 3 minutes to go, so unless there's any other hands up, we might bring this meeting to a close. I just wanted to say that the next meeting is on the 28th of May, and it is around Community Resilience Hub 101. I'm sure the link to sign up will be shared. All of the links for the next few meetings are already out and on our website, so we'll get the link shared and the follow-up to this. But I just wanted to say a huge thank you. Really appreciate, Kate, you dialing in at 8 a.m. your time. Hopefully you can have more of a rest for the rest of the day. And it's been really insightful. And thank you everybody else for spending your time with us and on this important topic, especially when it's so sunny outside, which is relevant, I suppose, to this conversation. A big thank you to everyone.